Thanks very much. I'm very happy to be here in Copenhagen. This is one of my favorite cities in the world. I'm very, very glad to be here with all of you. Always enjoy the great conversations that I have privately with many of you. I really do want to thank my friend Pia Knudsen, who has done the lion's share in organizing this, and everyone else who's been involved in helping her. Please give them a hand. Thank you, Carsten. Many, many wonderful people involved in this organization here in Copenhagen.
Bring coffee.
And bringing me coffee, is that what you did? I didn't hear you. Although one of you did bring me coffee, so thank you. So we're running a little bit late, and I don't want to waste a lot of time. I want to jump into my topic for today. And if we have time, hopefully the three of us, my wife Tracy and Chris Aubeck and I, might have time to do a panel or questions and answers and so on. That's the plan. So this is similar to a lecture I gave recently in Manchester, UK, but I've actually added some information here for you. I call it the new face of disclosure. Some of you might know who my background, but some of you probably do not. So I have been writing about the UFO subject for about 25 years. I became interested in the early 1990s. As was mentioned in my introduction, I was a student in Cold War studies at the University of Rochester in upstate New York, where I was very engaged in that, and I guess you could say fell into the UFO subject. Ultimately, I wasn't even curious if UFOs were real. I really just wanted to know to what extent were they part of our history, particularly our military history, and particularly the military history of the United States. That's where I started. And as every one of you who knows, who's studied this subject for more than 2 months, you realize this is a fascinating, deep subject. You answer one question and it can open up many, many more questions. And there you go, down the rabbit hole. So I've been there ever since. It's been the most fascinating journey of my life. I wouldn't change it for anything. So about 10 years ago, I wrote a book called AD After Disclosure. I had a very great co-author, Bryce Zabel. He was one of the creators of the television show Dark Skies, if you remember that, in the late 90s. That was Bryce. And he liked some of my other books, and he contacted me once for something unrelated to this, but our conversations mutated, and we ended up thinking, we could write a pretty interesting book on the idea of disclosure of the UFO truth, how that might happen. Is it impossible or is it inevitable? That's what I used to say. It was both. We ended up writing the book in 2 editions. And in that book, in addition to having my little paradox, it's impossible, but it's inevitable, I had a lot of other things to say. Essentially, we were saying, no secret can last forever. Secrets do end. And so the question we asked is, how might this secret end? When will it end? We tried to do our best to act like a think tank and not to engage in a lot of crazy speculation, but we really tried to look at society, at politics, at science, academia, and the rest, and did our best to figure it out. After that book was published, I continued to think about disclosure. It's funny, really, because when I first started writing about UFOs, I wanted nothing to do with the idea of disclosure. I thought that's a very premature subject. But people, because I was very political in my work, and because I was very explicit about my belief that there was a UFO cover-up, it's not surprising that a lot of people talking about disclosure would want me to be part of that conversation, and that's really what has ended up happening ever since. But after disclosure came out, I thought through a variety of different scenarios that I think could happen. How might there be an end to UFO secrecy? When we wrote After Disclosure, our main scenario was probably disclosure scenario number 2 there, which I later called Premature Disclosure. That is an accident, a sighting that happens that can't be denied, or a leak that occurs that cannot be denied. Something like that, something unexpected that just throws the system into crazy confusion and causes maybe rioting or causes revolution or who knows. You know, by the time we finished that book, my feeling was that the reality, the discrepancy between what our official truth is, that there is no UFO phenomenon, and the actual truth is so great, so vast, that the end of that would inevitably cause an enormous transformation, and not necessarily a pleasant one in our society. But anyway, I thought of other scenarios after that book was published. One I used to call fascist disclosure. That was a pretty dramatic term to use for it. But basically the idea was, you know, this is in 2010, 2011 when I was thinking about this, that we were moving toward a very, very ever stricter globalist, single ideology, let's say, you know, a rollback of the freedoms of the internet. We're now seeing this, I think, very, very clearly today in many areas. But I was thinking about this in 2011, 2012, and I thought, is it possible that the powers that be would see the end of UFO secrecy as inevitable also, and as a result would roll out their own very, very skewed version of disclosure after they have confidently assumed that there would be no challenge to their narrative? And now in the last few years, you have a lot of people saying this is exactly what's happening. I'm not sure that that's what's happening right now, but anyway, that was my scenario. I had another disclosure scenario that I envisioned, which I called for a while insider disclosure. Let's say government insiders or a faction within the government that believed in the end of secrecy, but somehow fought against other factions in the government or a power structure that didn't want such a thing to happen. Could that be the case? And I wondered about that. And then I had a fourth scenario, which I ended up calling people-driven disclosure. Kind of this sort of thing. You know, I participated in a number of these events. So you had the disclosure conferences started by Stephen Greer back in 2001. Many of you remember this. A bunch of them organized by Stephen Bassett, the X conferences starting in 2004. I participated in every one of those that Stephen organized. The citizen hearings on disclosure, which I also participated in for a week in 2013. And then other interesting events organized by James Fox, Leslie Kean, Robert Hastings, and I think there were some others. Various press conferences, public events, this type of thing to generate interest. And I think in general, with the advent of the web, with the advent of much greater openness, exchange of information, and the like, it seemed to me that it could be possible that the people, if we just want to use that as a generic term, could really push forward, become an irresistible force, as it were, in changing this. So what we've seen in the last couple of years, really the last year particularly, is what we might call the purge. You see it on YouTube. Not a week goes by in which I wonder, am I going to get dinged by YouTube this week? Happens all the time now. You never know what you are allowed to say anymore on YouTube. I've had some folks in Manchester just last week telling me, you're in trouble. We're watching you. We know how the algorithms are constantly changing. And of course you're getting yourself in trouble because you don't know what you're not supposed to say. And I'm having these conversations. Certainly anything that's political, you know, can be demonetized or deplatformed. Not just YouTube, there's Twitter, there's Facebook, and just Google search algorithms in general. You know, when you speak to very experienced SEO experts, search optimization experts, they're telling me that this has really dramatically changed within the last 12 months. And it certainly seems like that to me. So for example, if you were to go on YouTube, like right this minute, and type in the phrase UFO, this is what you would get. I did this less than 1 week ago. So you get one irrelevant response after another, and all, there's the top one there was a game. What is that all about? With 26,000 views, that was the number one. This is off my cell phone. So that's the first 4 pages of screenshots from my cell phone from 1 week ago. And then you get all major network. You get ABC News, you get BBC, Sony Pictures, the movie UFO is up there many times. CBS, I think there's a CNN, there's Fox, you get the idea. So the reason that this is the case is because they cheat on the algorithms. It's the only way they can win is by cheating and, rigging the search engines. And that's what you get now. So there's no, and in fact, when you look at the view numbers, some of them are kind of high. The ABC one, number 2, there is 797,000 views. That's okay. But as anyone knows who follows this subject, there are YouTube videos that have millions of views on UFO, but they're not there because they're not from the approved list of vendors of your information. A month earlier, I did the same thing, and it was almost exactly the same. So this is from, I think this was May of 2019, and you see a lot of the same, results. So obviously, what we're seeing is a purge, not just politically, but within the field of UFOs. Something that this was not the case more than 1 year ago. It was a lot easier. You would get much more honest answers in your search results. And yet, despite the purge, we can say, I would say something is happening in the field of UFOs. So what is it that is happening? There's been a drip of information. And I would argue that if any of us were to go back in time 3 years ago from this moment, we would be shocked to think of all that has come out just in the intervening time. Robert Bigelow, multimillionaire, billionaire, whatever he is, he's very wealthy, very important in all of this. Probably, in my opinion, I've never met Bigelow, but he's always struck me as one of the most knowledgeable people on this subject that I think we're likely to meet. He's been deeply interested in this a long time. He actually funded the abduction conference featuring John Mack in the early 1990s back at Harvard University. And he's got a very strong interest in this. So he does a show on America's 60 Minutes back in May of 2017, and he's very upfront about this phenomenon. He says they're already here. The aliens are already here. The person interviewing him, I think, was trying to shame him or embarrass him into backing away, and he wouldn't do it. He didn't care. That's interesting, isn't it? And on American mainstream news to have someone, Bigelow isn't a government official, it's true, but anyone who knows anything realizes Bigelow walks in some very interesting circles. So for him to say that on an American mainstream news show, that is significant. And later in the year, of course, you have the announcement, October 2017, of To the Stars Academy, makes its debut announcement, as it were. There's Tom DeLonge in the front there. And some of the recent or maybe current spooks, who knows? Some of them, you have people accusing this of all being a CIA op. I'll come back to that shortly. The only one of those people that I would say I know personally, in fact, that I do know personally, is a second from the right, Dr. Hal Puthoff. I have known Hal for a long time. The others I don't know. I know things about them. But what's interesting about this is, it's easy for us to lose perspective. Why is that important? One thing that made that announcement very important is that the stature of those gentlemen standing behind Tom DeLonge is not insignificant. They were prominent, not first tier, but let's say second tier level government officials with significant security clearances, we might say. And the fact that they were willing to go up on a stage and talk about UFOs on a stage as something real, that's not trivial. So it was important. And only 2 months after that, we get the first real breakthrough in the American mainstream media, and really we can say the world mainstream media, at least in recent times. When you look at the New York Times history on this subject, it's been one snarky debunking piece after another, after another, after another, after another. That's the history of the New York Times on this. Also with the Washington Post, which I would say was even worse and more insulting to our intelligence on this subject, but not on December 16, 2017, no. 2 articles on UFOs in one day from the New York Times. You know, you probably, if you were following the subject 2 years ago, and most of you were, I think it was pretty shocking. I was surprised. Now, there was a lot missing from those articles, but there was a lot that was very interesting that was in those articles. One of those authors is someone that I know, that's Leslie Kean. She had 2 professional journalists at the New York Times working with her on this piece. This was the article that announced or revealed the former existence of the organization called ATIP, that is the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, that was run in the Pentagon, we were told, from 2007 to 2012. And they were kind of muddy and messy as to, like, did ATIP leave? Did it stop? Did it continue? And all of that. A couple of other interesting things in that article that some people noticed and some didn't really pay attention to is the acquisition of materials, mysterious metal alloys in the article. Later, we learned not metal alloys, but what now are being called metamaterials, and I'll have more to say about that in a moment. But it was significant that you get this admission. You know, for years and years and years, those of us who talked about the reality of this, that the Pentagon was interested, the military, the United States intelligence community was interested, and they'd get laughed at. You conspiracy crank and so forth. And suddenly, here is our redemption. The New York Times is saying, aha. And indeed, it's significant. They downplayed a lot, of course, indicating, well, they don't really seem to do it anymore, and they brought in the requisite statements from skeptics like James Oberg, utterly irrelevant statements, but they brought them in anyway. I think really is psychological filler, if nothing else, just so that you don't get too excited about this. But there you have it. And then the other article that they put out that day, which I don't have a copy of here, but was the one that dealt with the Tick-Tack Ufo Incident in 2004, featuring Commander David Fravor of the United States Navy and his F-18A Super Hornet off the coast of California. Heck of an incident. And now that was a case that actually had been known about, had been discussed for the previous decade, but not really widely. The site above Top Secret had a thread on it from 2007, actually, but it really didn't go anywhere. And it went somewhere now. And I would say at this point, it's probably our best, it's probably the best known military UFO case of recent times. So the New York Times revelation, and then the Washington Post followed up, didn't stop there. 2018 was a big year in terms of a drip of disclosure. Let's just call it that for now. This was a piece that was featured by George Knapp of KLAS in Las Vegas. Many of you know George. George was here recently, wasn't he? Is that right? Yes. He revealed that this is a paper written by Bigelow's. Robert Bigelow was the contractor to the ATIP program. This is a paper written by that relating to the UFO encounters that were being studied under the ATIP program, specifically focused on the Tick-Tack Ufo Incident of 2004. And it was released, and some of the language in here is really quite interesting. Here, they're not using the phrase UFO, they're using the phrase AAV, Anomalous Aerial Vehicle. It's the phrase that they're using here. It's very interesting. When this came out at the time, you have a lot of people who really cannot see the forest for the trees, and they're focusing on all the wrong things. Like, this could not have been a military document. It's not written in proper military format. Well, no, it wasn't. It was written by a contractor. It was written for them. It was, nonetheless, it was contracted for ATIP. And the characteristics that they're describing of these objects, this object particularly, was no known aircraft or air vehicle currently in the inventory of the United States or any foreign nation, exhibited advanced low observable characteristics at multiple radar bands, rendering U.S. radar-based engagement capabilities ineffective. Basically, it's saying this thing was way far beyond our capabilities and we did not know how to deal with it. Of course, what we remember in the New York Times piece from a few months earlier is that the speeds of this so-called Tick-Tack UFO were measured at really being quite extraordinary. I did my own little calculation. Fravor did a couple of interviews at that time. He did one on Fox with Tucker Carlson early on, and he said, look, we had perfect visibility. We had crystal clear visibility of 10 miles. We had a practical visibility of 50 miles that day. This thing was gone out of vision in 2 seconds. So if you take a conservative estimate of that 10 miles visibility, you're still talking, I think it was something like 9,000 miles per hour. And in fact, we've learned later, and I'll come up to this, but I'll just state here, one of the radar operators of the USS Princeton on that occasion in 2004 was named Kevin Day. And he spoke about the radar tracking that he was getting at that time of this object from an altitude of 28,000 feet down to sea level in 0.78 seconds. That's a speed of 24 or so thousand miles per hour, over 30 plus thousand kilometers per hour, stopping on a dime at the ocean surface. You tell me what can do that. So you've got multiple witnesses with multiple types of data acquisition, making these observations. So anyway, George Knapp puts this out in May of 2018, very interesting. A month later is one of the most interesting lectures of the last decade on this subject. It was given by Dr. Hal Puthoff at the Society of Scientific Exploration, SSE, their annual meeting, June 8th, just a little over 1 year ago. This video is on Vimeo. It costs $5 US to watch. I would strongly recommend. Throw down the money and watch it and take careful notes. It's worth your time. He's talking about an artifact that originally was sent in the 1990s to Art Bell, allegedly from a UFO crash retrieval. So there's no provenance to this. We don't really know what this is, but we've known about it since the 90s at the least. Art Bell's a radio guy. What's he going to do with it? He gives it to Linda Moulton Howe to see if she can find people to research it. Linda Moulton Howe finds others. She finds Dr. Hal Puthoff, among others, and Puthoff in his laboratory studies this in great detail, along with Dr. Eric Davis, whose name will also come up in this lecture. And according to his results here, and he goes into great detail, this is a piece of bismuth and magnesium, primarily, ultra fine layers, the width of a human hair or less, bonded in a way that he said we don't really know how to do bonding of this type of material. He said the crazy thing is we looked at this, not only did we not know who could have made this, because we had no conception of how this could have been manufactured, but we didn't know what it was for. We didn't know what it could do. But then he said, well, time goes on, the years go by. He said in the last 2 or 3 years, we've actually figured a few things out. And his conclusion, and again, there's much more detail to be had on this, is that this piece serves as what he calls an outstanding waveguide for high-frequency electromagnetic radiation terahertz range. What does that mean? I had to look all of this up because I'm not a physicist either. What he meant by waveguide, of course, is something that guides a wave, like a canal guides the waves of water into a particular direction. So what he seemed to be saying is that this material itself takes electromagnetic radiation, that is light, essentially, or just below light, I believe, and converts it. And what he was basically saying is it seems it converted it to an anti-gravitic type of effect. That's what he was saying. Again, go to the lecture. He'll explain it much better than I can. It's an interesting takeaway, though, because, for years and years, people have been looking into this. How do you achieve an anti-gravitic effect? I don't know too many people who are really looking carefully at the material science of the actual craft themselves. But at least that's what it appears to me. By the way, there's a very interesting follow-up lecture by Dr. Jack Sarfati from last December of 2018, where he talks about the physics of the Tic-Tac UFO. And I very much recommend you listen to it. It's only 30 minutes long. Listen to it slowly. Stop, pause a lot, and take notes, because he talks about a lot of the same principles here that Puthoff is talking about here. There's much, much more that Puthoff said in this lecture. One of the interesting things was he announced his participation in Robert Bigelow's subcontracting of the ATIP. So Puthoff himself was part of the ATIP program. He talked about how this was the first time in June of 2018 that he was allowed to say some of the things that he did without going to jail. So I asked him not long ago, well, who gave you the green light, by the way? And he didn't give me an answer. He gave me a non-answer, in my opinion. So, but someone did, right? Someone did. Now, in his lecture that's on Vimeo, one of the things that he mentioned was, this is actually, he's got a very clever, humorous way of putting things. One of the things he did for Bigelow as part of this subcontract was to acquire, or actually put out a request for white papers or scientific papers on a variety of futuristic scientific areas. So he requested papers from leading experts in a variety of fields on where they believed their discipline would be, I think circa 2050. Or is it 2040? 2050. And he said, what I didn't tell them was that this was for a UFO project that was funded by the Pentagon. That was the one thing I didn't tell them, but I did tell them that we were interested in their analysis of their field, where it would be in the future. He said this is one good way for us to get a gauge on the actual science of some of these craft that we believe are doing what they're doing. That's a very clever thing to do, right? So he did, and he got 38 papers back. These are some of the papers. In January of 2019, Stephen Aftergood of the American Federation of Science was able, through his Freedom of Information Act request, to get a formal response from the Defense Intelligence Agency of the U.S. of the titles of these papers. Aftergood really did not understand what he was getting. His attitude is, government's wasting its money on these ridiculous Star Wars, Harry Potter types of fantasy papers. No, it's completely missing the point. It's totally missing the point. These are serious papers. In fact, they are listed on a server, U.S. defense server called the JWICS, that is Joint Worldwide Intelligence Communication System. In theory, you can get these papers and you can read them. I asked Putoff, how can I get these easily? He said, well, probably you should just write to the authors. Like, okay, well, we'll do that. I have read only one of them. I've read his, which is his paper on space-time metric engineering. Space-time metric engineering. There's one of the titles. Some of the other titles, warp drive, negative mass propulsion, traversable wormholes and stargates, programmable matter, invisibility cloaking, anti-gravity for aerospace applications, extra dimensions, dark energy, and so on. So this is really fascinating stuff. Putoff actually told me that as far as he has been made to understand, these 38 papers are the most popular papers on the JWICS server by far. He said they're considered the Bible of future tech, as far as he knows. So they're being taken very seriously indeed. But this all came about as a result of the ATIP program. And I'm talking about them here. I think it's significant because this is something that has come out just recently, in the last year. And so much information has been coming out that we almost get jaded by it. Like we just kind of forget how significant this was. If this came out 5 years ago, we would be grabbing onto it. But there's so much more that we almost forget. Shortly after the announcement that the DIA had these papers, we get another news article from April of 2019 that the United States Navy has updated its guidelines on UAP reporting and investigation, unknown or unidentified aerial phenomena. So it's interesting because, when the New York Times piece came out previously, that wasn't an official statement from the United States military that they were studying UFOs. That was simply the New York Times reporting it. according to their sources. So here you actually have the United States Navy saying, well, yes, actually, we have encountered objects that we don't know what they are. They have exceptional performance capabilities, and we are updating our guidelines on this. This is one statement from the article. The previous unreported move is in response to a series of sightings of unknown, highly advanced aircraft, intruding on Navy strike groups and other sensitive military formations and facilities. It's kind of bureaucratic sounding, but you can get the idea. It's very interesting. This is a very interesting article. There's a lot of admissions that came out of the United States Navy at that particular time. And it didn't stop there. Within a month, the New York Post, it's really funny. The New York Post is just known for tabloid sensationalist reporting. I'm from New York City, and I grew up with the Post and, those massively big headlines. But the New York Post actually did some very serious work on this case. I think a lot of us knew beforehand that the Post was doing some work on UFOs, and myself included. I very much underestimated the quality of what they were working on. They came out with this article on May 22nd of this year, just, 2 months ago? Getting an admission from the official Pentagon spokesperson that the ATIP program did pursue research and investigation into UFOs, or they say UAP. It's significant, again, because, as I said earlier, that the Pentagon had not made an official admission. So now you have an official admission that the ATIP program was about researching UAP. And then you get, just days after that, almost as if this is a concerted effort coordinated from somewhere, another New York Times piece. This is actually a really good article. May 26, 2019, by the same three authors as who authored the previous New York Times pieces, talking about not the Tic-Tac UFO encounter of 2004, but a series of encounters concerning the USS Roosevelt off the U.S. eastern coast of Virginia, primarily, in 2014 and 2015, pretty recently. And this is one of the pilots. I'll just read a little bit of the beginning here. The strange objects, one of them like a spinning top moving against the wind, appeared almost daily from the summer of 2014 until March of 2015, high in the skies over the East Coast. Navy pilots reported to their superiors that the object had no visible engine or infrared exhaust plumes, but that they could reach 30,000 feet and hypersonic speeds. So hypersonic speed would be roughly 5,000 miles per hour, say 8,000 kilometers per hour, something like that. These things would be out there all day, said Lieutenant Ryan Graves, who was pictured in the photograph just a moment ago. He's one of the pilots of the top Navy aircraft, the FA-18 Super Hornets. They're amazing aircraft. And he just points out at the bottom of this page, he says, you keep an aircraft in the air for that long a period of time requires a lot of energy. And he said, look, with the speeds that we saw, maybe 1 hour is the most you can get, but we saw these for 12 hours and more, actually. So the basic fundamentals of this particular article from May 26, these objects were seen in 2014, 2015, almost daily for 9 months, roughly speaking, while they were on training maneuvers. So that's 270 days or so, roughly? So that's a lot of sightings, apparently. Hypersonic speeds, so unbelievably fast speeds, beyond jet fighter speeds that we know about, anyway. And then, of course, beyond the speeds is the ability to accelerate instantly. That was observed, apparently, by these Navy pilots. Stopping, maneuvering, and so forth, all at a high level of, incredible level of performance. Nothing that we have. One of the most interesting, probably dramatic revelation of this particular article was a near collision. So you had two Super Hornets flying in tandem I think about 30 meters apart or so, about 100 feet. And an object flies between them. And it was observed briefly by one of the pilots as cube-shaped with a sphere of some sort in it. So what is that? There was an interesting article by a military writer, Tyler Rogaway, who speculated that it was actually something that we constructed, but I think even he realized that it was a bit of a stretch. And the problem with it is that when you're doing these types of maneuvers to these pilots on training, it's very dangerous. So we don't have any answers here. But of course, that's just one of the encounters. A lot of these objects did not look like a cube with a sphere inside. And I personally respect his work a lot, actually, but I don't think that this is a logical answer in this particular case. One of the things that they point out is that a lot of these incidents were videotaped, video recorded, I should say. And then on the same day as the New York Times article, this YouTube channel appears called The Nimitz Encounters. And you read the description, it's put up by the people involved in the encounter, apparently. That on the top is Kevin Day. He was the radar operator of the USS Princeton during the Tic-Tac UFO incident of 2004. Below is Petty Officer Gary Voorhis, also of the USS Princeton. So these are Tic-Tac UFO guys from 2004, and they are both fascinating to listen to. And there's many other witnesses here. This is a computer-generated recreation, obviously, of the Tic-Tac UFO just above the water. And if you haven't heard this case, I'm sure most of you have, but it's really a very interesting encounter. For an extended period, several weeks actually, this is where Kevin Day actually has a lot to say here, these Navy personnel doing maneuvers off the coast of California were observing unknowns, whatever these things were, unknown aerial objects in the sky, in the vicinity of where they were doing their maneuvers. And keep in mind, 2004, we're just a year or two into the war in Iraq and early on in the U.S. war in Afghanistan. So the U.S. military was on very serious war footing at this time. So you have objects doing something up there, maneuvering. Kevin Day has a lot to say about this. And so on the day that Fravor and another pilot are out there doing maneuvers, they are vectored in because there's another object that was captured, or that was not captured, captured on radar and detected. So they go to, they're vectored in to go to a particular point, and Fravor sees visually this frothing on the water, and he gets closer, he circles around, he goes down, and it starts circling, counterclockwise, I think, clockwise. He's circling, and it's 180 degrees opposite him. As it rises up to meet him, it's very aggressive, and then it just shoots off, and at the speeds that I was discussing with you earlier. So that's a recreation of this object, about roughly estimated to be about 40, 45 feet. So what is that, 10, 15 meters, 15 meters maybe. Anyway, so that came out the same day that the New York Times article came out. So a coordinated effort. The next day you get these op-ed pieces. The Washington Post, really, within the United States, without a doubt, the worst reporters on the UFO subject that we have had over the last 20 years. No one has been worse than the WAPO. They have an op-ed piece stating UFOs exist and everyone needs to adjust to that fact. I almost fell off my chair when I saw that. The Washington Post. Wow. What you obviously see is, this is how the American media is. It's very, very tightly coordinated. These, look at the next piece in Newser. Okay, UFOs exist. Now we need to start considering aliens. So there's coordination here. I don't think this is just all these people individually choosing this. To me, it looks like a rollout. I can't prove that, but that's what it looks like to me. And the other thing I just would say here is it's nice to see these types of statements in mainstream news, but we've got to be very, very careful. Washington Post, New York Times, at least politically, I don't consider them particularly trustworthy. They are the newspapers. They gave us weapons of mass destruction. Let's not forget. And a lot of other lies over the years in conjunction with the national security apparatus with which they have cooperated intimately for our entire lifetimes and beyond, I would say. So you have to wonder, what's going on here? Why? How? I have some theories, and I don't know that I'm right on them. And then within days of that, the rollout of this television show, Unidentified. All of this happened within a week's time. It's really amazing. So it's also maybe not so amazing, maybe it's coordinated. So this show comes out. There's Tom DeLonge on the bottom there. On the bottom left is Lou Elizondo, Christopher Mellon, Steve Justice of Lockheed Skunk Works. They're all part of the TTSA organization. And this is their show. And, you know, Tracy and I have watched all the episodes. I've looked at these episodes very carefully. So there's people saying they love the show. There's people saying they hate the show. There's people who are amazed at the revelations that this show has made. And in fact, there are amazing things that have come out here. Absolutely. And then there are people who are saying that the show engages in unwarranted fear-mongering. My own take on it is that the tenor of the show is not radically different from the first 2 volumes of history that I wrote of UFOs in the national security state. Not radically different at all. What I did, I tried to focus on military encounters with UFOs, particularly by the U.S. military. Why? Not that I think that they're better than civilian sightings. I mean, I guess I don't intrinsically, but they're interesting to me because in theory, military is responsible to the people because we pay for them for our tax dollars, so they're part of the government, and you would think that there would be some level of responsibility there. B, there's a paper trail sometimes. C, they're elements, they're connected with national security. So my logic back then, looking at those encounters, was, well, if the military is interested in this, that's important. And to me, that's exactly their attitude here. So, you know, one of the things that they stated, for example, on the USS Princeton in 2004 was how after the Tic-Tac encounter occurred, these unknown guys helicoptered onto the Princeton and took all the radar data and all the other data that had to do with this encounter. And no one knew who they were. And that's several years before the ATIP program supposedly existed. So you're wondering, all right, so what's this investigation? You know, if we're told that the military really doesn't care about these encounters, then why would that data be taken? Obviously, someone cared a lot about it and continues to. So where is this headed? For a long time, I've talked about this rebranding of UFOs that's going on. I think that's right. Somehow, someone has decided we need to switch the way we need to change the way we've talked about UFOs publicly. It's been very successful. It's been very successful. I mean, is it related to Hillary Clinton's very ham-fisted manner of referring to UAP when she was on the Jimmy Kimmel show 3 years ago? Probably. She does, Jimmy Kimmel's an American talk show comedian type of guy, and she goes on after Barack Obama and her husband Bill Clinton had been on. And Jimmy Kimmel asked them about UFOs, and they give these humorous ha-ha types of answers. Hillary, in 2016, when she was running for president, said, well, Jimmy, we actually call them UAP. And she almost, but not quite, but almost mispronounced the word phenomena when she gave her answer. And you have to ask yourself, well, what's that all about? Like, that's not an accident. Is this Jimmy Kimmel just exercising his own natural curiosity? I think we doubt that. I had a long conversation with a LA producer who knows all these TV shows. And he's like, look, we did a show with Hillary years and years ago. And 2 weeks before she came on, her people were in contact with us on the set, determining the kinds of questions that were to be asked. That's how that works. So none of this is by accident. You don't just ask a former president or sitting president or first lady or secretary of state off-the-cuff questions like that on national, micromanaged television in America. It doesn't happen. So it was planned. Now, maybe, my theory at the time was her manager, John Podesta, was interested in UFOs. We all know that. I would never have believed that Hillary Clinton would be a disclosure president. I argued very strongly against this. My friend Stephen Bassett was totally arguing that she would be. I never believed it, still don't. But I did believe that Podesta, being a very shrewd political operator, recognized that the UFO subject was no longer quite the third rail of politics that it would have been even 8 years earlier when it completely decimated Democratic presidential candidate Dennis Kucinich when it came out that he had witnessed a UFO. They destroyed him in 2008. A lot changed. And I think Podesta realized, no, you can actually get a few votes if you've got the mainstream media in your pocket, which they did, and if you handle it just right, which they did. They did a good job. So, anyway, we have been seeing since then some kind of what I believe is a faction. I think the TTSA people are a faction who have their reasons, maybe altruistic, probably selfish, for wanting to promote a disclosure narrative. Let me just go through my notes here, and I'm just going to talk a little bit off the cuff here. The rebranding of UFOs, we can call it disclosure without the history. They've got this idea that, these UAP, we're just discovering this now. Like, the way they talk, you get this idea that, well, yeah, we're encountering these things in the 21st century. We don't know what they are. You hear Elizondo say this all the time. You hear Christopher Mellon say this all the time. Like, clearly they have some ideas. And they're walking a very careful line. All right, so let's take the possibility that they're a faction. I call them Bigelow's Club. They're really Robert Bigelow's buddies, Putoff. And I'm going to talk about the Wilson League in a moment. You have Eric Davis, and you even have Dr. Kit Green, and there's a number of these other people who've all been associated with Robert Bigelow for a long time. And in my view, they have all been trying for many years to work their way into the center of that labyrinth of classified information on this subject. And they've had their connections with mainstream media, some of them. My understanding is that Jim Semivan of the CIA has had very good connections with the Washington Post. Of course he would. If you're high-level CIA, you're going to have great connections with the Washington Post. But that has helped with media management. So they've had their own ability. And my understanding, and I am not yet going to mention who I'm getting this understanding from, but I've had a very good understanding from someone who made it very clear to me that there are elements within the Pentagon that absolutely hate these guys and that absolutely want to destroy them and will stop at close to nothing to prevent this from going any further. So you've got a bit of a war going on, and I don't find that hard to believe at all. So I think what we're seeing is that these guys are very carefully, cautiously rebranding UFOs into UAP, into something a little more palatable without the whole history of crash retrievals or alien abductions, or they're going very mainstream. You've got a very hostile scientific community globally that thinks this is all ridiculous. You've got an utterly indifferent global media that could care less about this. So they have to figure out a way to move this forward with the allies that they have. And I think personally that is what they have been doing. And I'll just say, it's very likely by the time if this goes out to YouTube or anywhere else, events are moving very fast, so this could be utterly irrelevant by the time this makes it out there. There are individuals who have maintained very strongly that this is all a CIA operation. And indeed, I mean, in TTSA, there's a lot of individuals who are former CIA, or maybe you could argue current CIA employees. It's true that there are rife with intelligence community operatives. To my knowledge, it is not true to state that Luis Elizondo was CIA, as has been done. There is no evidence that I have found at all that he's ever been employed by the CIA. Doesn't mean he's never worked with them. I don't know. It's possible. But he's not a CIA employee, so it's sloppy to label him as such, in my view. Same with Christopher Mellon. Powerful guy, Mellon family, high-level defense, yes. But CIA, I'm sure he's worked with them. Doesn't mean that he's CIA. But to say more broadly that this could be an intelligence operation, sure. So let's look at that. The problem that I have with these types of analyses is very simple. They're going first to their perceived motivations of these individuals before they actually discuss the content that is being released. And in my view, that's going exactly backwards. It is content first, always first. And then you understand the context of what is being said. You cannot understand the context if you don't know what the information is. And so what I see is a lot of accurate, relevant information being released by these people. And as long as they are doing that, I will support that. If they start putting out information that I think is untrue or lies relating primarily to the phenomenon, then I would absolutely call that out. Now, if they're lying about their background, as has been claimed, that's significant, but it is less significant than the content. And it's also not clear that they are doing that. So before people start waving their hands, running in circles, and saying this is a CIA op, I would say, let's actually line up our evidence and find out how this is a CIA op and what exactly is their agenda. The only agenda that I've been able to hear from people that this is an op is that it's some kind of false flag alien invasion, scare the people to death op to make you run to the arms of the government for protection. And I find that very, very unpersuasive. Not that I don't believe governments do shenanigans like that. Yes, they do, but I don't see it here. I've never seen it here. And someone really better bring their best case forward if they're going to convince me. Now, one thing that I want to know is who is enabling these guys to do what they're doing, to walk through this very treacherous tightrope that they're going over. And that I don't know. I've tried to ask, I've tried to get answers and haven't gotten an answer. I've gotten non-answers. So something's going on. Now, one really interesting theory to keep in mind, I think is very, very worth your consideration, is to take this out of the hands of government and to look at private industry. So by that, Lockheed Martin or Boeing or Martin Marietta or General Dynamics or General Electric or General Motors or any of these other major defense contractors. Because the thing is, as I have learned, the real power is there. The real money is there. The real scientific research and development capability is there. The real engineering is there. The real brilliant individuals are in private industry, and they're the ones with the high-level security clearances, much more than in the CIA or the Pentagon. That's an important thing to take away here. Once a lot of these high-level government officials leave the CIA, they go into private industry and get better and more security clearances that they were not able to get within the intelligence community. And the reason is because it's private industry where the action is. So if we think about that, let's think about maneuvering here. Let's pretend for a moment that there is such a thing as UFO crash retrievals. I happen to believe that's true. Let's assume, moreover, that there's been detailed scientific analysis done covertly on this technology, which, again, I personally believe. I'll have more to say about that when I talk about the Wilson leak in a moment. So let's say that's true, right? Stay with me here. So if that's so, you have some organizations, some companies that are in on the secret and others that are less in on the secret. So you have some companies that have an unfair competitive advantage. You have other companies that want to get in on that gravy train. Sure they do. There's a lot of money there. So there's always going to be behind the scenes maneuvering by groups on this issue, and it could absolutely very well be in the interest of an organization, of a company, to push a disclosure narrative for that reason alone, to get that technology available to them as well. One individual I spoke to years ago on this, who knows this very well from the inside, said to me, look, he said, you want to know the truth? Every 5 years, there's this high-level analyses on whether we should tell the public on this or not. And he said, he said, I participated in one such study. I was in a legal subgroup. He's not even a lawyer. I don't know how that happened. But he said, we realized, like, one thing we were terrified of, or they were terrified of, were class action lawsuits by defense contractors if a disclosure event happened. Seems so prosaic, but it actually makes a lot of sense. Unfair trade practices and the like. So anyway, I'm just suggesting to keep in mind the possibility that the drivers behind this could very well be private money. Some people have said, well, maybe it's Robert Bigelow. Maybe he wants a bigger piece of the special access programs and all of that. I don't know. I don't know. But it's something that I do wonder. I'm not going to lie about that. So when you seeing a lot of the news that's come out in the mainstream on this, a shocking amount of news, the question is this, are they trying to tame or create a safe form of disclosure? It seems that there's a real possibility there, although the last few statements from some of the TTSA's guys, including Tom DeLonge's tweets, which I don't have on here, but they're quite amazing, actually, seem to be going further and further into acknowledging multi-million dollar, hundreds of $1 million special access programs on UFOs beyond ATIP. But it seems that there's a chance to roll out a safe or sanitized form of disclosure. That's a possibility, but I think it's very difficult to do that, and I don't think that will succeed ever. I think this subject is, this phenomenon, it's not just a subject, is too wild and too uncontrollable. I believe we're going to get to some very hard questions. You know, I talked earlier about the purge that's going on in YouTube and Google in general, Facebook, and all of that is true, of course, but that's not the end of the story. So there's one possibility that we're moving to a future in which all of our digital information is, or I shouldn't say all, in which the critical digital information is very carefully managed and controlled. That's a possibility. The other possibility is that that attempt will fail. For example, will there be viable competitors to YouTube that spring up in the near future because too many people get deplatformed? Well, I would imagine yes. Will there be viable competitors to Facebook for the same reason? Shadow banning and the like? I would say probably yes. So we have to allow for the real difficulty of keeping this subject contained. I think it's very difficult. So can the establishment truly dominate the narrative if they are rolling out this disclosure narrative? I think it would be very difficult, or anyone who's trying to control the narrative, really. There's a lot of questions that will come up. You know, when we did After Disclosure 10 years ago, Bryce and I really asked about these things. For me, the big question is, if you make an acknowledgement that UFOs are real, ever, then wouldn't it be the case that people would say, oh my God, so how have you been lying to us all this time? How have you managed this secret and kept it from us? That would be a very significant question. And, you know, there's always a danger of the torches and pitchforks crowd coming up and, you know, like this upcoming race onto Area 51. What is that up to now? 3 million, 4 million people have signed up for that? Naruto running, is that what that is? I had to look, I didn't know what Naruto running was. My kids knew it, I didn't know it. But there would be a lot of difficult questions to have to answer to this. And I don't know if they're answerable, but they would be very, very difficult, and they would make any disclosure process a very, very unpleasant thing. And frankly, something that As I was thinking of this a decade ago, I thought even if any U.S. president were to say, yes, UFOs are real, aliens are here, that still wouldn't settle the arguments. That would probably deepen the cultural wars that we're seeing now. It would deepen the ideological divides because people would be arguing over the nature of these other beings, without a doubt. So I wonder, I'm about to segue into my second segment here of this talk, how much more will it take for an avalanche to occur? This is always what I wonder. How much toothpaste has to go out of the tube before it's too much? And I wonder. So how many admissions, how much deeper and further can these admissions go before people actually have a moment where they recognize the emperor is wearing no clothes, as it were? Where we have to look at this big picture. And I don't know, but I definitely believe we are far closer to that avalanche than we were a little over 2 years ago, to my astonishment. So I want to segue to talking about this man here. This is Vice Admiral Thomas R. Wilson. He's very important. I spoke to him on one occasion. He got hung up on me. That was back in 2006. He was head of intelligence of the Joint Chiefs of Staff actually, he was deputy head of intelligence, I should correct that, of the Joint Chiefs in 1997. He was promoted to head of intelligence and shortly after that became director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, and then retired and became a senior vice president with a company called ATK. They've been bought out, but he's still with them, an advanced weapon and space systems company. Now, what we know, there's no argument or debate about this whatsoever, is that in April of 1997, this man, Thomas Wilson, met with Dr. Stephen Greer and astronaut Edgar Mitchell and a few other individuals about, really, Greer kind of ran this meeting, as far as I could tell, gave a lecture and talked about special access programs, that is, the primordial black budget classified programs that aren't supposed to exist, but of course they do exist. Special access programs dealing with ET technology. That was what they came in for. You have Stephen Greer and a moonwalking astronaut going in to speak to this man, and some of his colleagues as well, including his boss. So there was a meeting that went on. That much is acknowledged. Now, in late 2006, a gentleman showed me 2 pages, possibly 3. I've always been trying to remember, but not less than 2 pages of a transcript. He didn't tell me the names of the individuals involved of the transcript, but he told me about this meeting. He didn't give me names. I didn't get Wilson's name either. All of this was unknown to me. It said that Stephen Greer and other people had met with this man about ETs, and that this man, Thomas Wilson, had gone for the next 2 months after that to look for those black budget programs or any black budget program that was related to that subject, that he found it and by rights should have had access to have some form of regulatory authority over it or supervision, and was denied access, and not even by government officials, but by the corporate attorney of the program, by the program manager, all private employees of the company that ran the special access program, not even by U.S. government personnel. That this individual was angry, indignant about it, and spoke to someone about it, and that was the transcript that I was allowed to see. And in that transcript was the statement, I saw that this technology, they told me, was not made by man, not by human hands, was a statement that I read, and I've never forgotten it. So over the years, I talked about that from time to time. It's not like I didn't, or pretended it didn't happen or hid from it, but I didn't have any document to support it. And so I always try to be careful about it. And then, surprise, surprise, in the spring of just this year, all 15 pages of that document were leaked. And that's what I want to talk about right now. So I'm calling this the Wilson leak. The man who wrote those notes is this man on the right, Dr. Eric Davis, colleague of Hal Puthoff, employee of Robert Bigelow through NIDS, National Institute of Discovery Science. And I want to talk about this right now. So there's a very excellent article by this gentleman, Giuliano Marinkovic. Did outstanding research and compiled what I think is accurately every single reference on the web over time, chronologically, to this meeting, this Pentagon 1997 briefing. I'm in there a number of times. Grant Cameron's in there, Billy Cox, American journalist, lots of other folks. Stephen Greer has talked about this many times, as he would. And Edgar Mitchell, the man in the center there, has talked about this as well on occasion, and he did. By the way, the man on the right is Navy Commander Willard Miller, or Will Miller, who accompanied Mitchell and Greer in the meeting to present the information on this special access program. Anyway, there's the website. You can go check it out. It's excellent compilation of this. So these are the pages, and it's dated October 16, 2002. So in other words, 5 years, a little more than 5 years after Greer's meeting with Wilson took place, Eric Davis of NIDS is able to meet with Admiral Thomas Wilson. Now, all we're doing is speculating on how this happened, but I'm going to take a wild guess and assume that this happened as a result of being able to go or going on an errand, essentially, for his colleagues with Robert Bigelow, Hal Puthoff, Dr. Kit Green, most likely, Colm Kelleher, I'm guessing, and maybe a bunch of others, Edgar Mitchell. They were all part of this circle of individuals who communicated with each other on a regular basis. We're all deeply interested in the UFO phenomenon, all deeply interested in the phenomenon of aliens, and everything related to it. And Davis is able to get a meeting, finally, with Admiral Thomas Wilson. I'm just going to walk through some of the interesting points of this. So TW is Thomas Wilson, and these are Davis's notes. All right. And by the way, this exists in its entirety in a number of places now, including my website, richardolmembers.com. It's a free article. I have a piece on this, and you can just go to my site and you can pull down all the JPEGs of this. It's easy to read. I'm sure they exist many other places by now. So according to Davis, Thomas Wilson confirmed that the meeting took place. Greer, Miller, and Mitchell gave a talk in the Pentagon conference room. Along with Wilson was Admiral Mike Crawford and General Pat Hughes, who was Wilson's direct supervisor at the time with the Joint Chiefs. April. And then telling Davis, after that meeting ended, Miller and Wilson spoke privately. So Miller came with Greer and Wilson, but they were both Navy officers, and so they had that camaraderie, and maybe it wouldn't be surprising that they would talk. For 2 hours, apparently, according to Wilson, they talked for 2 hours about UFOs, MJ-12, Roswell, crash UFOs, alien bodies. And Wilson said, yeah, I was intrigued by this. I knew about intelligence that we've had on UFO close encounters and foreign government encounters. I've seen the records, he tells Miller. And they go on. So they talk about this. So Davis is in the car with Wilson, and he says, okay, what happened? Because there was a lot of earlier chit-chat here going on, and Davis wants to get to the point. According to the notes, apparently they sat in a car for a little over an hour, and Wilson just unloaded, and then that's what these notes are. So Wilson says, well, after Miller and I finished our 2-hour meeting, I started making some calls. I knocked on doors and I talked to people for about more than a month, 45 days, and got some advice from some very powerful people, including recent Secretary of Defense William Perry, who is still alive. He's 95 years old, a very accomplished man. Read his biography sometime. Very brilliant man. Anyway, Perry and others said to Wilson, well, look, if you're really looking for this information, go through the records group. It's known as the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Technology, AUSTAT. Go there, look there first. And Wilson says that, yeah, they told me about a special project record group that doesn't belong to usual special access programs. It's a special subset of the unacknowledged carve-outs wave programs. What does that mean? An unacknowledged special access program is a special access program that, you know how I said special access programs don't exist, but they do? Unacknowledged special access programs really don't exist, except they do. They're totally unacknowledged. They're waived. Waived as in the rules don't apply to them at all. And they are buried deep within other special access programs. That's how this all works. Programs within programs within programs. That's secrecy for you, particularly in the United States system. They are the kings of secrecy by far. No one else is even close to what the U.S. is able to do in terms of the money it spends, the capability it has to control this incredible maze-like structure of secrecy that is dominated by private contractors. Dominated by private contractors. Anyway, so he gets all this advice on where to look, and Davis says, okay, so where did you find this program to presumably find reverse engineered alien technology or whatever you're looking for? Where did you find it? Wilson says, core secret, won't say. Core secret, what is that? I'll tell you in a minute. Davis, what's the code name for it? Again, core secret, I'm not going to say that. Davis asks all these questions, and Wilson's like, nope, not going to say that, not going to say that, not going to say this. Defense contractor, yes. One of the best of them, the best one of them. The betting money these days is on Lockheed Martin, but no one really knows for sure. Davis keeps asking these questions, and Wilson just keeps saying, nope, core secret. Wilson does find the program, though. Finds it. He says at the end of May, he finds it after looking for a month and a half or so. He says, I made 3 calls to the program manager, and on one of them, we did a conference call with the program manager and the security director and the corporate attorney. So he spoke with those 3 on a conference call. Their whole thing was, how did you find out about us? You're not supposed to be calling us. They were confused. Why? And he said they had a very testy tone. So they were surprised and not happy about this. So Wilson tells him, he says, look, I found them in the Alstat Special Records group, and I wanted to know about their crashed UFO program. He just apparently came out with it. What their role was, did they have one, what's up with that? And they were not happy. He told them that he wanted a formal briefing, a tour. It was within his rights, he said. He was deputy director of DIA. He was assistant joint chiefs of staff. J2 was his position. Your not briefing me was an oversight on your part, he said. You need to correct that oversight. So their answer, it's almost comical if it wasn't such a serious thing. They said, well, we need to discuss this amongst ourselves. We'll get back to you. And they hung up. So eventually they arranged for a face-to-face meeting. Shortly, about a week, 2 weeks later, 10 days later. Mid-June, he flies out to see them. They meet in a secure conference room. So it's the 4 of them, Wilson and these 3. So let me continue. He says, yes, they were a reverse engineering program. They told him something was recovered years ago. Technological hardware was recovered. So Wilson, I don't really know why he said this, because he was already going on a lead provided by Greer that it was all UFO, ET related. But he says to Davis, I thought they meant Soviet, Chinese, etc. You know, something like that. Although, frankly, Chinese technology by 1997 wasn't all that. Today, yes. In the 90s, I wouldn't think it would be as big a deal. But this is what he says, Soviet, Chinese, who knows? Like a missile or something else. And they said, no, not that. The program manager is talking. He said, a craft. It's a craft, an intact craft they believed could fly. And then in parentheses you see here, space, question mark, air, water, dimensions. Was it from overseas or not? He answers. They said, no, it could not be possible that it's from overseas. Where did it come from? And Wilson tells Davis, he said, the program manager said they didn't know where it was from, although they had some ideas on this. It was technology that was not of this earth, not made by man, not by human hands. And again, this is the statement I read back in 2006. So this is what apparently they're telling Wilson. So they made a couple of other statements about this. They were trying to understand this technology. They were trying to exploit this technology. They had very painfully slow or very slow progress, a painful lack of collaboration to get help from the outside scientific community because of the high level of security classification of this. Roughly anywhere from 400 to 800 people are in. And that was it. That's a small amount of people if presumably you're talking about technology that is vastly, vastly, vastly beyond what we have. So painfully slow. Okay. Agonizingly slow with little or no success. Now, keep in mind, this is what Wilson is telling Davis, presumably what they told Wilson. Is it truth or not? Who knows? I don't know if they're telling him the truth, but apparently this is what they told Wilson. So, Wilson, there's a couple of things I'm leaving out here. One was that they showed him what was called the Bigot list. That's the list of people who are in. And he says, I'm looking at them, and it's all private contractor. It's all employees of the company. It's like, I didn't notice almost zero or almost no U.S. government personnel, hardly any names that I actually recognize professionally. These are all company people, which maybe he seemed surprised by or not, but that was the case. So yeah, Wilson was not let into the program. He demanded to be in. They said no. He said, well, what are your criteria? They said, well, we're not really going to tell you our criteria. We don't have to tell you our criteria. And this goes on and on. And then he says, well, I'm going to complain. They said, fine, complain all you want. And then he does, and got into some significant trouble. He did complain, and he was told, this is by his supervisors in the government, you really want to do this, your career will suffer. You want to get DIA promotion? That won't happen. You'll take an early retirement and maybe lose a couple of stars on your lapel along the way. So Wilson was very angry, but what can you do? Not much, apparently. So that was that. Now, where did this all come from? When these papers came out, and I'm going to try to pick up the pace here, because we're going to wrap this up. I never had a doubt of the truth of these notes. But, and I think most reasonable individuals who read through these notes understand this is the real deal. These are notes by Dr. Eric Davis. Not an official U.S. government document. These are notes by a scientist who had an interview with a former high-level government official. It's interesting. It's very interesting. It's powerful. It's more than interesting. And yet there were a few people, I think there were an increasingly insignificant minority, although a loud insignificant minority, who said, this is all a hoax, this can't be true, this is nonsense. Well, I don't agree. It came to me very quickly that these papers were from the files of the late Edgar Mitchell. And I did an interview with the man who's second to the source of this. His name is James Rigney. He's an Australian. He's a very good guy. Told me, I've got that whole thing on YouTube. You can look for it. James knows the whole story. I don't know the whole story, but I know a lot of the story. And what has been very clear to me, Edgar Mitchell died in January 2017. When he died, some of his papers relating to NIDS were acquired legally. This is what I was definitely made to understand, and above board. So they weren't just taken. They were given with permission. I was also told, and I believe, that this was not some intel operation. This was total private initiative. And I think that is true. And that makes sense where these all came from. Mitchell himself made comment about the meeting with Wilson. And you can go to Above Top Secret. There's a thread there. I've got the site right there. He made this statement in 2008, talking about unacknowledged special access programs That quote on the left is actually from a really excellent article by a fellow named Bill Sweetman on special access programs. And Mitchell is essentially referring to that article in his statement. He said, the UFO program that the Admiral sought would be in this category, that is of an unacknowledged special access program. He said he'd be required by law to deny its existence. A core secret special access program means that it's a secret so powerful that revealing it would be catastrophic in some way. That must not ever be given up. So even a no comment would be a breach of security if you were involved in such a program. Now, you can give a no comment if you weren't involved in it, but if you were involved in that program, you would be obligated to go beyond a no comment and issue an actual denial. So another interesting support for this document came, in my view anyway, from a YouTube interview with Stephen Greer and Willard Miller. Will Miller, of course, is one of the people who accompanied Greer and Mitchell to the Pentagon meeting. This is in 2013, so this is long before this all blew up. And they're speaking in a relatively quiet manner here. And Miller says, the Admiral took this briefing with the same level of gravity and interest as he would from any other national security matter. So when folks say that the military is not interested in this subject, that's obviously not the case and hasn't been our experience. Greer jumps in and says, yeah, no. And in fact, I remember we were slotted for a certain amount of time, and he kept turning to his aides saying, cancel this and cancel that, because he had tremendous interest. And Miller goes on and says, yes, yes. It was also a little interesting aside as I was leaving. Now here Miller says much less than what is mentioned on the notes. The notes state that he spent 2 hours with Wilson alone. But of course, keep in mind, on a YouTube interview, he's not ever going to be able to say, oh yes, I met with Admiral Wilson for 2 hours privately. We talked about this. He didn't do that. But he did make this statement. He said, one of the Admiral's aides turned to me and said that, you know, the subject of MJ, Majestic 12, came up. And there's been a lot of debate as to whether that's real or ever existed. And he said, we know it exists. We here at the Intelligence Directorate for the Joint Chief just don't have a need to know what they do. So Miller says that. So a little breadcrumb he drops there. So let me jump to this little statement here. Because this is also indirect but very relevant support for the validity of this Wilson leak. This is May 31st of this year. And this is just at the rollout of the TV show Unidentified, which we just talked about. And here's Luis Elizondo on Tucker Carlson's show on Fox TV. This is a very interesting interview. You can find this on YouTube, of course. And Carlson, at the very end of this, says, do you believe, based on your decade of serving in the United States government on this question, that the U.S. government has in its possession any material from one of these aircraft, he says. And keep in mind, this is just a week before the leak of the Wilson memo. So the Wilson memo, the Wilson document is not out yet. No one knows about it yet. Or very few people know about it. So Elizondo says, I do, yes, I do have knowledge of whether the U.S. government has in its possession any of this stuff. I do. Carlson pauses, he says, wait, you think the U.S. government has debris from a UFO in its possession right now? And Elizondo pauses, he says, well, unfortunately, Tucker, I can't really, I have to be careful of my NDA, my non-disclosure agreement. I really can't go into a lot more detail than that. Carlson's about to let it go, and Elizondo then says, but simply put, yes. You can find it on YouTube. Yeah, that's that's a significant statement. Now, there are people who say, well, it's all a lie, it's all disinformation. Well, I don't think so. He makes a statement that's interesting enough. So that same night, a friend of mine, James Ian Dolan, great guy, energetic, smart young researcher who had been in touch with Eric Davis semi-regularly, I think, writes to Davis immediately. And again, keep in mind, this is before the leak of the Wilson memo. And Ian Dolan just says, hey, by the way, that's James' YouTube channel called Engaging the Phenomenon. James created this slide. I thought I would use it. James says, Eric, Dr. Davis, what do you think of Elizondo's statement about crash UFOs? And James told me that actually Davis wrote several versions, really carefully edited this answer, and wrote this: Luis Elizondo's very brief answer to Tucker Carlson's question about whether the U.S. government is in possession of recovered, crashed, and landed UFO technology hardware is 1,000% accurate. My national security NDAs prevent me from adding any further comment on this. And the element that he apparently edited carefully was he added in recovered and landed to just crashed. Now, why is that significant? Well, if you go back to page 13 of the notes, they're talking about an intact craft they believed could fly. So if it crashed, it wouldn't, maybe it could have crashed and be intact, but the implication is that it was recovered in some way other than it just crashing. So I think it's really fair to say that Davis is working right off of the information that he had known for years and years and years already. That we didn't just get crashed UFOs, we had recovered intact UFOs. So, now I'm going to wrap this up within less than 5 minutes. The Wilson memo isn't the only document that leaked with this. The day before came the leak of the so-called alien autopsy emails. And I'm currently writing a fairly extended article on that because I just did a fairly lengthy interview with Dr. Kit Green, who is the main subject of that leaked email. But let me just say a couple of things here. The first question I asked Kit Green about this is this leak, are these emails authentic? And his statement is a direct quote, absolutely, it's authentic. And I just think people need to understand that. Again, there's people out there saying that this is inauthentic, cut and paste from a variety of emails. Well, they're from the files of Dr. Edgar Mitchell. I don't know how he wanted to put his own files together, but Kit Green and I spoke in extensive detail about the contents of that 11-page document. So I will tell you, and you will be able to read very soon. I'll have this article done pretty soon. We've been traveling, so it's difficult, but yes, of course it's authentic. Anyone with a brain to read can understand that this is genuine conversation going on here. Grant Cameron on his Facebook page released a third document from the Mitchell files that he had access to. Grant's a very important part of all of this, and I don't have time to go into his role. And this is not an earth-shattering document here, but he did put it out. He did get access to it, and it's simply a letter from Robert Bigelow to Edgar Mitchell from 1996, and it just simply details the upcoming NIDS board meeting that they were going to be participating in, the agenda and so forth. But it's from the exact same source. It's from the Edgar Mitchell files. Interesting no comment that I got from Hal Puthoff on the Wilson memo early on. This is June 12th. This is what he wrote to me. I have his permission to repeat it, so I'm repeating it. He just said, with regard to authenticity, we have no comment on the documents recently being circulated. As some of us still retain U.S. government security clearances and remain bound by the secrecy oaths we have taken, we believe it is in the best interest of the United States government and ourselves not to comment on any documents that purport to describe classified U.S. government programs or information. Best regards. That's like a no comment with an apology, and I'm grateful for it. I have a lot of respect for this man. I've communicated with Hal Puthoff for a long time. To my knowledge, he's never lied to me ever. He doesn't tell me everything I want to know, but of course, how could he? So that was his very carefully worded no comment. I got a similar no comment from Kit Green about a month after that, quite recently. I asked him about the Wilson memo, the 15-page document. Now, keep in mind, he said absolutely the alien autopsy emails are authentic. Now I'm asking about the Wilson one. And I think he was waiting for this question. So he said, this is an exact statement. I have agreed on the record that I have no authority to confirm that it is a legitimate memo, because in fact, the fact that I've seen it, the fact that I think one thing, doesn't give me the authority to declare its provenance as legitimate. I can't do that, so I won't say that. It's another. Now, he gave me an off-the-record statement, which I cannot publish here because he asked me not to. But I did say, am I allowed to tell the world that you gave me an off-the-record statement? He says, yes, you may. So I'm telling you what he said. He gave me an off-the-record statement, and I'm not repeating it at this time. And you can just use your imagination, I suppose. So what are the implications of a lot of this information? Where are we headed? Well, one of the things that comes out as a result of these memos, although I think we've, again, known this for a while, is that there's a tremendous amount of privatization of the UFO secret. It's long out of government hands. And anyone who's studied, forget UFOs, if you've just studied government secrecy, particularly in the US, beyond UFOs, you find it's the same thing. Privatization is the rule. Private money, private finance, private corporations, they dominate. They are the top players. Because they have the money, they've got the influence. And of course, if you're a four-star general or admiral, when you retire, where do you go? You work for those companies and you make a lot of money and you get better security clearances. So that's where the action is. And it's very difficult because these companies, their information is not classified, it's proprietary much of the time. And so they're impervious. They're impervious to Freedom of Information Act requests. There's what is known as compartmentation or compartmentalization. It's endemic. Meaning everyone's in their little compartment and a lot of the information is not shared. My personal opinion, it's only my opinion, is that there are several core areas where significant secrecy on this subject is kept. And it's entirely possible that you've got competing areas that don't necessarily play nice with each other or share information. I think that's probably the case. We've developed in the US anyway a form of what I'm now calling legal illegality. You know, this sanction away from any kind of observation. These companies that are legally impervious to observation and to regulation. And it shouldn't be legal, but it is legal. And in that kind of a context, I ask myself, how could there really be an actual disclosure? And to what extent is it full or genuine or truthful? And I don't have an answer to that. I don't know. But I think what's happening is that we are in a very, very tumultuous era in human civilization, without a doubt. Anyone can see that. And so the only thing that I would say is it would be very foolish to think that tomorrow is going to look like today. And with that, I'm going to thank you for your time. Thanks very much.